I have done a lot of peopling this week. I had the opportunity to go to the Houston rodeo. And if you have never been to the rodeo in Houston, Texas, it is a sight to behold where there are thousands and thousands and thousands of people. And as I was watching this cultural phenomena really in Texas, because y'all know I'm not from Texas. I grew up in Kansas City. We went to the Royal, which was pretty fun, but not the same as the Texas rodeo. And there's a stadium full of all these people, and everybody is focused on people who are riding horses and people who are trying to stay on a bucking bronco, or my absolute favorite, the 5-year-olds who are trying to stay on a sheep, and it's called mutton busting. And all I could think about was, as I'm watching this, is like, everybody is enjoying themselves. They're having so much fun. It's still competitive. It's still a business. People are making money in this place, but we were all still focused on the people. And I think that that is something we can do. In fact, I don't think it, I know it. I know that we can create successful organizations who are doing business and profitable, but they are still focused on the people first. And I am so excited to interview Paul Mather today, because he has spent his career really helping people, especially in the tech industry, create lives and organizations that put their people first in a way that I think is incredibly powerful. And so I am so excited to introduce you to Paul. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Jen. How you doing?
Yes, so great. So great that you're here today. And if you are listening live in the comments, say hello, tell us where you are in the world, because I'm so excited for you to find out where Paul is in the world. So Paul, give us a little bit of an introduction to how did you get here? What's your story and how you started developing this business?
Sure. So I'm dialing in from Antigua today. I'm somewhat of a digital nomad, but I'm based in Antigua. I have been for the past few years since leaving the UK. You can probably tell that I'm from the UK from my accent. So I actually studied languages at university. So even in my student days, I was connecting with people a lot in lots of different countries, lots of different cultures. And I ended up joining the military. That was my first career. I was a British Army officer. I was an infantry platoon commander in Afghanistan. So I was thrown in at a young age to managing lots of people. You know, my very first team was like 50 people, and a lot of them were very experienced. And that was a steep learning curve, and I had to support them not only professionally but
under a little bit of pressure.
Under a little bit of pressure, yeah. So that was my grounding in leadership and management. I carried that through to joining a big tech company, Deliveroo, which is now a public company. It's a food delivery company in the UK, and I was there for 5 years through a sort of hyper growth period. You know, I joined as employee 15, left when we'd grown by about 500 times, expanded into 13 countries. We had about 50,000 delivery riders on our books. So crazy growth journey, crazy hockey stick, more like a roller coaster. I used to say, you know, there's lots of ups
yeah,
and
they
downs.
Tend to be that way.
It wasn't a straight hockey stick. It never is. And I found that there were lots of leadership challenges, and there were a lot of people who were quite senior in the organization who weren't necessarily equipped to deal with those leadership challenges. I, as this relatively young guy who just spent 4 years in the military, actually had a lot of hands-on leadership experience from having done that, and training, but also real world experience, including on operations in high pressure environments. And I kind of combined those experiences then to become a freelancer. And over time I've progressed into coaching and mentoring founders and senior operators, and I specialize in leadership and operations, but really focusing on the people aspects of the organization, how to leverage the best out of a team, and drawing on those experiences in the military and in tech.
One of the things I love about your story is that it's a great example of what you have done to say leading isn't just about the task at hand. It's not just about the task. It's also about the whole person. You had to lead them professionally and personally in the military. And then even in this hyper growth state, I often end up working with organizations as well that have been in that transition scale, really fast growth, because that's where culture problems tend to come out. Oh, now they're there. And you have found, I think what I find to be true as well, there's lots of people that become leaders, or they're great creators and great founders, but then they're like, oh, wait, Now what? What do you notice in that stage of leadership where they've gotten to that point and all of a sudden things change? What do you notice are those friction points for those types of leaders that you're like, "Ooh, this is what I have found because I had the experience of leading, not just creating something."
Yeah, honestly, I think for many first-time founders, especially, it only really occurs to them when they get to that point where, they've come up with a concept, they've built the MVP, they've raised a ton of money from investors. They're often people, obviously, who are good at ideating, good at creating, good at product,
Mm.
often good at selling, um,
Mhm.
pitching for investment, raising investment, and then they get the budget, they hire the team, and then they're like, right, go and do this, and they expect that to work, and obviously
Right.
it doesn't, right? And then they end up, therefore, because they're not utilizing the team properly, because they're not leading
Mhm.
effectively, they end up doing everything. So, they're the
Yes.
founder, they should be focusing on the high level strategy, but they're in the weeds of operations, product, sales, marketing,
Yes.
everything, because they don't know how to give clear directions that people can follow and actually produce the deliverable that they envision in their mind. They have
Mhm.
a vision of what they want to achieve, but they don't convey that in a way that people can actually follow it and do it to their standards. So then they get
Yeah.
frustrated and they just do it themselves, which is
Mhm.
why you get these founders end up working 100-hour weeks and burning themselves out and still not actually getting the best results, because
Right.
they've got the budget often to hire these experts who are better at those functional areas than them. If they were able to effectively delegate, they
Mhm.
would get way higher quality output than if they did it themselves.
Right.
But they don't know how to do it. It's a skill set you have to learn.
It is totally a skill set that you have to learn, and I think what I have noticed is that and it's always interesting when I get on a discovery call with a client who is interested in bringing me in. They often tell this story.
Mm,
We have these great leaders, or we have these great people who were excellent nurses, or they were excellent graphic designers, or they were amazing coders. And then we put them in leadership and now they're failing. And one of the questions I'm often asking is like, have you done any leadership training program? Or have you done any communication skills training or anything like that? And most
mm,
of the time it's not really, because
mm,
that skill set, the difference between your craft
mm,
and your leadership is so vast, and it's the completely different type of skill. Not that
mhm,
there's not something transferable between the two, but and so what often I see in those types of organizations is they become so focused on the output and they forget
mm,
about the people. And
mhm,
do you find that, and how do you help people switch that focus?
mm. Yeah, I think part of the problem as well is, you know, a lot of these founders do struggle with what I've just spoken about, but
Mhm.
they still manage through just sheer grit and work ethic to
Exactly.
get through, right?
They know how to do that. They
But
know how to just keep
they
going.
leave a lot of collateral damage in their path, right? And it perpetuates the
Exactly.
problem in the industry, because if you're that way inclined, you're going to promote people who are that way inclined into leadership positions, and then they
Mhm.
become senior operators, they become founders in turn, and they never actually learn the lessons, which is that they need to be better leaders and lead their people properly, so it's more sustainable, right? and
Yes.
and one of the things I always say is, how are you performance how are you evaluating people's performance so that you can promote based on not only individual contributor output, but also
Mhm.
leadership potential? Because you've probably seen it yourself, Jen, many times. I've certainly seen it many times. The person who gets promoted from the sales team, let's say, to lead the sales team when the next team leader position comes up, is the person with the best sales figures. That's
Yeah.
not necessarily the best person to lead the team. They
Yeah.
might be a terrible leader. Quite often, actually, the best individual contributors are really not the best leaders. There's not a direct correlation always.
Mhm.
It's often the people who are kind of middle of the pack. They don't excel as individual contributors. They're certainly not lazy. They don't do badly. They do well enough, but actually their talents are better um, utilized serving other people as a leader. But they
Mhm.
often get overlooked for promotion.
Yeah. So I like what you said here about like trying to figure out how to utilize the team better. Like that part is because if we don't have the self-awareness to notice, we will always hire people that reflect ourselves. Like that's
Hmm.
just human nature. And so
Hmm.
how do you help a founder or in that expansive growth state, even a leader who's in charge of a team, how do you help them gain that self-awareness and start to show, oh, here is how I either communicate effectively or delegate effectively or hire the right person? Where do you start with them to move past that just reflecting the leader?
Yeah, so there's certainly an initial stage when I work with founders, when I'm mentoring them, where I help them to get to know themselves better. Where their blind spots are, what they're strong at, what they're weaker at, and often because I'm in an independent position, I'm not one of their direct reports, I'm not one of their immediate peers, I'm not one of their investors. They'll share more stuff with me than they will with other people. So I'll be a bit more honest about how they're actually feeling inside rather than what they project outwardly.
Yes.
So there's that awareness building phase, and then there's putting in place structure. So when it comes to actually the best place to address this is early on, right? So hire the right people to begin with is the best starting point. I can help people fix it if they haven't done that, but it's easier to help them hire the right people to begin with. That's better. So for instance, coming up with a bottom up job description. So a lot of people copy paste. They'll be like, well, I saw this other startup, they raised their Series A and they hired XYZ person, so I'll just take their job specs, copy paste them, hire very similar people. Or I'll just go out to my network and like, oh, I know a pay-per-click specialist, I know an ops director, and just reach out to that person, have a coffee, and it's like, right, you're in, because we both get on over beers, or we both like the same sports team, or we both like running, or whatever. That's not a good way to hire. You need to actually work out what attributes you need, what skills you need, what experiences you need, and then build the job specs bottom up. And then once you've got that ideal candidate profile, you then go out and find people who match that, which is probably not your mate. It's probably not the person who's like immediately obvious to you. You might have to think outside the box a little bit to go and source the candidates that best fit that profile, and then put them through a fair selection process where you don't just sit down and chat with them, you actually test them. You put them through case studies and evaluations, and you ask them questions which encourage them to think critically, so you get to see who they really are, not just what they write on their CV.
And I like that too, in the way that you're still looking for the person, that it's not just like you said, that sometimes the best salesperson or the best person isn't necessarily the person you want for that other position. And really looking at people holistically. So one of the things, and as you said, you start with that awareness process. You've got to know where your gaps are so you can hire for that. Like it's one of those things that oftentimes I get a little bit of pushback. People want to skip that part. They kind of want to skip the self-awareness. They kind of want to skip the softs. They call it soft skills. I call them power skills. They want to skip that component. And in the end, that is what will build such a shaky foundation, because you're just building on task and not about people. So how do you, when you're thinking about that and helping an organization really leverage the team, what are some of the things that you often say? Like, what are the things that you find really common that you're trying to help people through about, lots of different organizations?
Yeah. So as I said, delegation is a really, really big one. And the way that often manifests itself is, a founder or a senior operator like a COO will come to me and say, I tasked my direct report or I tasked my team with something, and the work came back and it was rubbish. It's not what I wanted, not what I needed, it's not what I asked for. And I'll say, is it not what you asked for? What did you ask for? And quite often they'll say, well, I told them blah, blah, blah. And it's like a very vague thing. Like I said, this is our goal, like go away and do it, basically. I'm like, right, okay, so you gave them no detailed instructions, you gave them no parameters, you gave them no deadline, you didn't tell them the format you wanted it in, you didn't tell them the style guidelines, you didn't tell them the color palette, like, et cetera, et cetera. Whatever the task is, right, there are certain parameters that reflect the vision that they have in their head for what they want that deliverable to look like. If you don't communicate that, that's not what you're going to get. You're going to get what the other person's vision is, which is unlikely to directly match your own unless you've built up that culture of delegation. The great thing with delegation is it's kind of self-reinforcing. Like, the more you do it, the more people understand what you're looking for. So then in future, you don't have to give such detailed direction, because they come to know what your preferences are. They come to know like the format that you want it in, or how long it should be or how quickly you're going to want it back. They can predict that based on your behavior because there's a pattern. You build a pattern. But before you start doing that and throwing away the rule book, you need to actually write the rule book to begin with. You need to give them those clear guidelines to work from. So, I will get them to create their own template for delegation, with a list of fields like, what's the deadline for completion? Like, who needs to be consulted? Like, what's the maximum amount of budget you're allowed to spend on this, et cetera, et cetera. And it's amazing how quickly they get better results from that. And it frees up a ton of time, right? Because it's slow to do that. But I say, look, it might take you an hour to write that document, to delegate the task, but you're going to save 10 hours going back and forth trying to correct the work that they've not done to your expectations because you didn't communicate your expectations.
Absolutely. This month we're talking about engagement on the podcast, and that is such a key engagement skill of here's how I communicate thoroughly with people. I'm always saying the goal of communication is shared meaning. It's shared meaning because we don't always know, we can't read each other's minds. And the brilliance of the template, if you're going to do it over and over and over again, so you're not keeping that mental space and everybody kind of knows what to expect, even if maybe not every single field applies to every single thing, it absolutely helps you think through a process and communicate clearly to somebody else. It's just so good. And oh my gosh, okay, our time is up. I'm so sad. Please, Paul, tell the people where to find you, how they can get in touch with you. We've got your website here. Give us the details of how we can stay with you.
Yeah, sure, Jen. So yeah, my website, pauldavidmather.com. LinkedIn, I'm Paul David Mather. Those are the best places to find me. That's where I share my content. I share a lot of content based on leadership and operations, focused on founders and operators in the tech space. And I also have a closed community for mid to senior level operators in the tech space who are looking for a new job, because career mentoring is something that I do as well.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for your expertise and joining us today. So appreciate it. Everybody join us next week. Nicole Steinbeck will be here and she's fantastic. And we're going to be talking about being a brave leader in some of those really challenging change management situations. And it's going to be a great conversation. She's always wonderful and fantastic. I think this is her second, maybe third time on the pod. I'm very excited about it. So that she's coming back. Paul, thank you again for your time and we appreciate it.
My pleasure, Jen. Thanks for having me. Bye-bye.
Absolutely. Bye. So let me put my coach hat on for just a sec. Don't just leave this here. Take a moment. What did you learn? What's your next tiny action step? Share this episode with someone and tell them. Connect with us to keep this conversation going. As always, I'm Jen Whitmer. Thank you for listening to Joyosity. I don't take for granted that your earballs have a lot of information coming at you. Please take a moment to rate and subscribe. It really helps more people join us in creating positive culture with complex people. So work is a joy, people are whole, and organizations flourish. Can't wait for you to join us next week.